I've always been curious about where Somali pirates and others like them get such powerful weapons and fast boats, and how they know the locations. Most importantly, how do they find out that a ship is passing 500 nautical miles off their coast? Well, they shouldn't have their own satellites, right? So who sponsors, protects, and directs them? Now, gentlemen, you're about to be blown away. You've heard about Somali pirates, of course, right? Dozens of ships hijacked far from the coast of Somalia. They say it's up to 800 nautical miles from the shore, so you can't even see it from there. That's how far it is when you look. They have fast, powerful boats, modern weapons, and state-of-the-art navigation systems. Where from, what, how, who is sponsoring them? That's the question. Are you sitting steadily, deep in your chair? They are sponsored by the United States of America. I'm not joking right now. Besides pirates, there are also armed gangs in Somalia that engage in extortion, robbery, theft, and the sale of weapons and drugs. They are also sponsored by the United States of America. But you're not surprised anymore, right, are you? As we found out, United States Agency for International Development. Well, it was sponsored by the United States. Let's put it that way. Yes, after we abolished United States Agency for International Development. United States Agency for International Development, United States Agency for International Development. To be more precise, let's say, it kind of ceased to exist. The question is, why did they do it and how? How did they manage to organize and cover all this up while avoiding punishment from United States Agency for International Development? So, foreign aid? So they shut it down, investigations are underway, and now those who were shocked by the actions of the Democratic Party have started to come forward, but there was no one to complain to before. Wherever you go, the same people will turn you in and things will only get worse. But now there's Bombandi, there's Cash Paddle, the Senate, as they say, and Grassley, the senator people go to. Well, the main thing is Trump, that's clear. But let's start from the beginning.
Somali. They have been receiving development aid, which is separate from humanitarian aid, for at least 43 years from United States taxpayers, and we have been the largest donors of aid in this country.
Under Ronald Reagan, they supported bandits in both Nicaragua and Somalia. It turns out,
I'm sure that after almost half a century of economic development funded by the United States, they really have a developed economy, don't they?
Today, guys, I want to tell you a really interesting story about the reality of foreign aid and how useless it is. Because as we speak, the country of Somalia and others besides it are currently facing an economic crisis since United States Agency for International Development was closed and abolished.
who from the United States helped these bandits stay in power for 43 years in a row? We provided them with unchangeable power for 43 years and let them in. I would put it this way. Dozens, maybe 30 Somalis in the United States were allowed to settle together so they could continue to remain a separate group, not mixed with Americans. Well, it's easy to recruit people from there later, right? Besides, this allowed them to elect their own representative to Congress since they were all grouped together. This is Elkan Amar. But as soon as Trump canceled the subsidies, Somalia's economy, by the way, was there even one? It collapsed.
Economic ministers are warning about a decrease in tax revenues, a halt in economic production, and the unavailability of many vital services for the population. And of course, the liberals are using this as an excuse to say, see, that's why the United States Agency for International Development cuts were a bad idea. Trump is so cruel. Look at what we're doing to poor countries. We're making them poor again. But of course, that's very shallow thinking. If you think more deeply, you need to ask questions like, how exactly? Did it just happen that simply shutting down United States Agency for International Development, which the Democrats said was a minor issue, and even a small part of the budget suddenly has such a dramatic impact on some of these third world economies? Guys, I'm 22 years old, and for as long as I can remember, the United States has been endlessly providing aid to Somalia. And you, the older generation, I'm sure this started long before that. And yet, look at 2025. What have they built because of this? Have they made even a single step forward? Have they achieved anything as a result of this? No, because the simple reality is that foreign aid doesn't work. Whether you look at it from an optimistic or pessimistic point of view, the conclusion remains the same. It was long overdue to cut this foreign aid. Let's start with the pessimistic one. On one hand, you can look at history and say that Somalia has never really been a functional country. So it's not going to magically change and turn into Wakanda overnight just because you gave them a little money. So foreign aid is useless and just a waste of taxpayers' money. I would say that's a strong argument, but on the other hand, you could be optimistic and say that Somalia might have a future. But as you can see, dependence on foreign aid created complacency. They didn't build anything because of it. And you know that famous saying about teaching a man to fish? To help them advance as a country, you really have to let them stand on their own feet, push them out of the house so they stop, sitting around doing nothing, and start building something for themselves.
Time and again, we see the same thing. Europe thought the United States would protect it, so it didn't take care of its own defense. And now they're trembling, thinking that Russia, with its 120 million people, will somehow conquer the 550 million people in the European Union. Ukraine thought that, according to the Budapest Memorandum, uncles and aunts would come and not let anyone take it over, and it has already lost at least 20% of its territory. Because it thought that someone would protect it. Children whose parents shield them from all the realities and problems of life don't know how to deal with those problems. They fall into depression and end up hating those very parents who protected them, who wrap them in cotton wool, as they say. Yes, the same thing happens with any long-term or indefinite subsidy project. Instead of learning how to catch fish, they learn to hate those who have fish.
The United States Agency for International Development cuts had, quote, a serious impact on Somalia's economy, according to the head of the Development Bank. Again, how did it happen that your economy depended so much on United States Agency for International Development that, it basically shut down without foreign aid? Again, that doesn't seem sustainable to me. And look, as I repeat, if this had continued for, say, 5 years, even 10 years, and it was a slow, gradual process, to help them recover, it seems obvious to me, and should to everyone, what was happening. This whole thing was a scam, right? It's no different from things like electronic benefits transfer or Section 8 in the United States, right? Basically, these are programs that incentivize poverty because, for example, if you make more than $40,000, you're excluded from these programs. If you get married and have a combined income, you usually lose a lot of government benefits. So we have an incentive structure for people to keep getting free money and stay poor. For the same reason, many benefit recipients think, well, what's my incentive to get a job or move up in life, because then I'll lose the free money. It's much easier, basically, to sit around and get subsidies. It turns out this isn't the only example, and this applies to both domestic and foreign policy. Again, teach a man to fish. That's the story. The closure of United States Agency for International Development earlier this year hit Somalia's economy and tax revenues, said the head of the country's development bank on Tuesday, quote, in Somalia. It really affected our gross domestic product, said Kodan Osman, president of the Somali Bank for Development and Reconstruction. He said this at the Financial Times Africa Summit in London on Tuesday. She said that the reduction in aid affected the economy, as the authorities did not expect it, causing harm to economic activity and impacting sales tax revenue for the government. Well, first of all, I was told that, for example, United States Agency for International Development was mainly involved in humanitarian issues, so they funded hospitals. And, free water programs, clean water, things like that. So how is the economic activity resulting from this so significant then? Right, tax revenues from sales. I was called a conspiracy theorist just for thinking United States Agency for International Development was giving her a lot of money to spend. So I'm asking again, how can this be? And again, I'm asking, how could you make your economy so dependent on something as unstable as foreign aid? Moreover, part of me also has to ask the Somali authorities a question, although I don't deny that it's true. But we also need to ask how much of that United States Agency for International Development money ended up in the pockets of foreign leaders. These corrupt foreign governments, which very often receive aid from the United States and other Western countries, and then actually appropriate it. Well,
Of course they stole, that's obvious, yes. But in order to get that aid, they had to keep the country in a state close to catastrophe. That is, not to develop anything that could get the country out of its dire situation. You know, in America, there's a program called welfare. It's a program to help the poor, which eventually ends when the recipient finally reaches an annual income of $40,000. It means they have to earn $39,999 and not a penny more, and also work for cash on the side. Or maybe steal a little, sell drugs, protect prostitutes, rob, or do something else that's interesting, useful, and, well, exciting. And in addition, of course, get that very welfare program, the handout from the government. By the way, the incentive system in the United States was built like that. Now they're trying to destroy it, trying to change it. I don't know how well it will work out. I don't know if they'll be able to push it through the Senate and Congress. Say a woman has 3 children from 1, 2, or 3 husbands, or none at all. What does it matter? She has 3 children and no husband. So she received a lot of handouts, but in the same situation, if there are 3 children and she has a husband, she gets nothing. Like, what was that? You have enough money, right? Do you think there aren't many young couples who figured out what's beneficial for them, but what's not beneficial about being unmarried? You know, people say, so what? You just signed some papers, changed your last name. Breaking up is easier. You fight, get offended, yell, split up, and that's it. It's the same with the next guy who's not your husband. It's more convenient and easier to break up. And the woman goes on taxpayer assistance, getting paid for deciding not to work but to have sex and give birth. So there's an extra benefit. The child grows up without a father. Listen up. 78% of criminals in the United States grew up in fatherless families. In the ghetto, kids are 20 times more likely to join a gang if there's no father in the family. Inside the ghetto, 20 times more likely. A child is more likely to join a gang if there's no father in the family. 20 times more likely. 20 times. Damn. So basically, we're paying mothers to raise gangsters. Absolutely wonderful and, most importantly, smart government policy. Which party wants us to give our hard-earned money not to our children, but to children from poor, broken families, where women have multiple kids just to make money? Well, so they don't have to work, and so they can raise criminals. Or rather, so that the kids grow up completely uneducated and end up becoming criminals. Hooray for our smart and far-sighted politicians. That's it. This is democracy, ladies and gentlemen. Political democracy in all its glory. Now, you probably think that this should be told to the leaders of the Democratic Party, right? They'll understand everything and change everything. The leaders of the Democratic Party know this very well. They have a good education, they have a high intelligence quotient, they understand everything. They know all about welfare and United States Agency for International Development. They are anything but idiots. Well, they're not idiots, with some exceptions. There are exceptions everywhere, but very few. They're not idiots. Maybe they don't know how to think. That's a completely different thing, so to speak. I've already explained what it means to think. But so, if they're smart, then why are they being raised? Bandits in our cities and bandits in Somalia, in Sudan, in Mali, in Nigeria, in Burundi, in Yemen. Micronesia. Honestly, I've never heard of such a country in my life, but it turns out it exists too. And it turns out United States Agency for International Development sent a lot of money there. And of course, there's Haiti, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and a country with a completely new name to me, Lesotho, or maybe Lesotho. I hadn't even heard of this country or several others, but it turns out for some reason my money is being sent there. Maybe it's so they'll like the United States or so they won't form an alliance with China or Russia. But there's already an open law, so to speak. In my opinion, in 1961, Andrew Galambos' law was already published, which goes like this. Everything that bureaucracy does always brings a result directly opposite to what was intended. If someone didn't get it, let me say it slower. Everything that bureaucracy does always, without exception, brings a result directly opposite to what was intended. I completely agree. I've checked it multiple times. For example, they froze the rent. Well, they set a limit there. A limit, yes. And they got it very soon. Dirty, rundown buildings with insects, drugs, and prostitution. That's it. The last part may not be so bad, but the rest is generally not good. You know the famous Chernomyrden saying. So we wanted the best, but it turned out as always. The modern Democratic Party has set itself the goal of destroying the United States of America. Here's how the stronghold of individualism works. Naturally, from this point of view, individualists are hard to control. It's hard to take away what they have, so to speak, earned, their property. It's hard to convince them to go along with the herd. They are individualists. That's why in 2000 Soros said in a lecture at New York University, that's New York University, that the last obstacle to building a just society throughout the world is the United States of America. And the Democratic Party, starting with Soros, who supported Obama, and you could say it all started with Obama, officially began to dismantle this last enemy. How? So the first thing is, well, as Marx suggested, by draining the lifeblood from the free market system, the blood in the veins of market relations. There is money, of course, yes. That is to drain, to take money away from the middle class. This is, as they say, task number one. Task number two is expansion, to shake the moral foundations, the family, children, education, and common sense. Task three is to pit brother against brother, children against parents, and neighbors against each other to create an atmosphere of hatred, suspicion, and general distrust. Then any action from the other side is perceived as terrible, and it reinforces the opponent's belief that this horror, this racism, fascism, sexism, ageism, whatever else they've come up with, right? Not only is it needed, but it's also necessary to physically eliminate it. That is the undermining of all religious, read moral, foundations of American society. Do not kill, do not covet, do not steal, show respect. There, so to speak, they become empty words when hatred rages inside a person. You know, there's an old joke. A gypsy decided to teach his horse not to eat. He kept teaching and teaching, and he almost succeeded, but the horse died. They've been trying to teach us since Obama's time to be immoral, illogical, unreasonable, and not individuals, but just part of society. That is, in my words, a herd. And they almost succeeded, but then Trump came. Yup. And now the question is, what now?
National Broadcasting Company just published some nightmare news for the Democratic Party, confirming what we already intuitively knew. But now we have tangible evidence to support this. The modern Democratic Party is now a full-fledged communist party. And this sensational news came out as Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago is doing what any good communist revolutionary would do, calling for a general strike to destabilize society and overthrow capitalism.
By the way, listen to the speech of Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago and compare it to the speeches of Trotsky, Bukharin, Zinoviev, and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. What you're about to hear is Marxism-Leninism translated into rather dumbed-down English. Dumbed down. Because Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago is not particularly bright or well-educated. Well, he just doesn't have that.
So here's what we need to do at this point. If my ancestors, being slaves, were able to organize the greatest general strike in the history of this country, challenging the super rich and big corporations, we can do the same thing today. I call on black people, white people, Latinos, Asians, immigrants, and gays from all over the country to stand up against tyranny and to send a clear message to the ultra-wealthy and big corporations. We will make them pay their fair share of taxes to fund our schools, jobs, healthcare, and transportation. Democracy will live because of this generation. Are you ready?
The essence of the speech is, let them give more money, more money, let them give it. They have a lot of money and we have little, so let them give more. If they don't give it, then we'll burn them, we'll destroy them, you won't get a single penny at all. Give us more money.
Thus, modern democratic cultural Marxism is ironically more radical and angrier than traditional Marxism. Marxism focuses on the rich versus poor and working class versus elite. The grievances are about socioeconomic oppression. The Democrats' cultural Marxism is much broader in defining oppressors and victims. They certainly divide by class, but also by race. Whites oppress blacks. They also divide by gender. Men oppress women. It's as if only the Democrats could take a terrible, murderous ideology and make it even more hateful. And the reason they've expanded the range of those they consider oppressed is so they have more clients to manipulate into joining their angry mob to overthrow the status quo. So maybe you're not poor, but hey, you're a woman and subordinated to men, so join our struggle. You may not be poor or a woman, but if you're black and oppressed by whites, join our struggle. A call for a general strike in the third largest city in America is nothing less than
incitement to rebellion. But here is Brendan Johnson on MSNBC defending his battle cry. What do you think a successful strike would look like? Well, first of all, if there was ever a time for workers to unite across our country, it's right now. And I remember the words of Dr. King when he said that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement ever came together, what tremendous potential we would have. And we are right in the midst of that now. This means that working people all across the country need to send a really strong signal to the super rich and the big corporations who have received, some of the biggest tax breaks and advantages in the history of our country. And if we are not ready to put forward real economic demands, if that means, of course, refusing to work, if we are not ready for that, then I don't see how we can transform this country. Every major social movement in our history had a complete strategy, whether it was legal action, courts, or economic boycotts. Especially at a time when the concentration of wealth continues to grow, while more and more people are barely making ends meet. At the end of every week and at the end of every month.
It's funny that over the past 100 years, the standard of living for the working American has actually risen, not fallen. Access to car ownership, household appliances, television, and electricity was limited to only a few people 100 years ago. Now an average working family has 2 cars. Let's say at least 2 televisions, with one or both being smart TVs, a couple of computers, laptops, and as many smartphones as there are people in the family. In 1925, 100 years ago, the amount of real estate per capita was, converted to meters, 27 square meters per person in total. Both workspaces and living spaces and so on. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's 93. That is, it has increased by 3.5, almost 4 times. And that's because we started living in bigger apartments, bigger houses, and so on. So is there a salary? In comparable money, it decreased in 1925. If you recalculate it in today's money, the average American was making about $98,000, $99,000 and paying 3% in taxes. So on average, Americans, after receiving their annual salary, brought home $95,760. I took these numbers from the Statistical Report of the United States of America. So the Statistics Office. Today got it, remember that, right? 95,760. Today they get on paper 80,610 pay 15% tax. So they take home 68,600, and that's 95,760 in today's money. It was around 5,000 back then, 100 years ago, and now it's 68,600. But thanks to technology and cheaper production, you can buy a lot more clothes, household appliances, cars, and other small things. Services. So buying a home, buying was more affordable in 1925 than it is now. Let's figure out what that means. So it means that strikes, marches, protests, and unions didn't help anything at all. New technologies helped with buying consumer goods, but when it comes to buying a home, you might say, ha ha ha. The government now takes 15% instead of 3%. I'm simplifying this to make the relationship clear and understandable. So population robbery has increased 5 times. 100 years have passed, and we're being robbed 5 times more than we were before. Because of this, it's become difficult to buy housing. So what has actually improved? Many things have become cheaper again. Why? You already answered that question yourself. What got worse is that the government is robbing 5 times more, and that's why housing has become less affordable. Well, you might ask, why then? Why the general strike that the mayor of Chicago is calling for?
I mean, he gave away the whole game plan. Rewind the clip back. He reveals it with a big smile on his face. His goal is to transform the country. He wants women, people of color, which, if I may add, is very racist, and the working class to be in control. All because they consider rich, white, heterosexual men to be evil, disgusting, and the villains of society. By the way, Martin Luther King's legacy is desecrated every time someone like Brenda Johnson or Zoran Mamdani refers to his words. To get approval from the grave to promote their radical Marxist agenda? I just can't understand how we fought against communism abroad for so long in real hot wars and fought it at home with tough legislation. And now we've just allowed communist agitators to infiltrate our government, cause unrest, and stir up revolution across the country.
I've always said internally the internal enemy is more dangerous than the external one. In our own Ukraine, by the way, they'll end up fighting for independence there, for the honor of Ukraine against Russia. What honor? They'll decide for themselves there, but then they'll end up in slavery to their own people. And it'll be the same thing, just, well, in Ukrainian. Instead of singing Russian songs, they'll sing Ukrainian songs, but otherwise it's the same, except that in the United States, thank God, for some reason fewer people are susceptible to brainwashing. I don't know why. That's it. Probably people who are more emotional are more easily brainwashed. And it's not like it's a good or bad thing. It's just the way a person was born. If he's more emotional, he perceives emotions more, so to speak. When someone is more practical, more individualistic, more closed off, he doesn't trust emotions. He needs something else. Yes, those people who are more emotional are more easily brainwashed. Here we call them members of the Democratic Party.
Take a look here at some numbers from Gallup, because Gallup has been testing this for years, actually for decades. The main attitudes towards socialism and capitalism, these are the latest data they've collected. Overall, when asking people, do you have a positive attitude towards socialism? 39% of Americans said yes, while 54% have a positive view of capitalism. But look at the breakdown by party among Democrats. Look at socialism. This is again at the national level. 2/3 of Democrats across the country, not just in New York, say to Gallup that they have a favorable positive opinion of socialism. Only 42% feel that way about capitalism. But look, independent Republicans are different. A small majority of independents have a positive view of capitalism. 3/4 of Republicans have a positive view of capitalism, and in both cases, less than 50% have a positive view of socialism.
So, the first thing I want to point out, and there's a lot to think about here, is that I don't think there's any way that 14% of Republicans have a positive opinion of socialism. Being a Republican means believing in free market capitalism. So I would put that number closer to 1% or 0%. But based on the numbers from this poll, the average positive view of socialism among independents and Republicans is 26%. And the average view among Democrats from their poll, which again I think is much lower, is 66%. So, there is a 40-point difference between the economic system that the average American wants and what the Democrats want. That's why I said earlier in this video that Democrats won't win elections again. They once again find themselves on the unpopular side of an 80 to 20 issue.
Time and time again, Democrats are for open borders, for letting any illegal immigrant vote. What should be done with the money earned by Americans? So someone crosses the border, goes straight to the polling place, and casts a ballot. I want 75% of Americans' money to be taken away and given to me. So the Democrats are in favor of girls and men showering together in the same shower rooms. So they're against arresting criminals, against expelling bandits from our country. And now they're also in favor of taking as much as possible from producers and dividing it among themselves. More, and then a little bit more like, highway bandits.
Now, this trend among Democrats at the national level isn't new either. It's been forming for some time. Again, according to Gallup, look at this. Starting with capitalism, in 2010, 15 years ago, Democrats were mostly divided, showing both positive and negative views on capitalism. And look at this number. It remained stable, and then over the last 5 years, it dropped to 42%, barely above 40%. Meanwhile, consider what happened with socialism. Again, this is the attitude in the Democratic Party. In 2010, it was 50-50. It has increased. And now, in the last few polls, 2/3 of Democrats say they have a positive opinion about socialism. So if Mamdani is successful, Peter, in New York, I think it's fair to say that it's not necessarily a revelation that socialism, his version of socialism, may be acceptable to some Democrats. It might just be further confirmation of what the polls have actually been telling us for some time now.
I am not surprised that those who can't achieve a good life for themselves hate and envy those who have what they wish they had. They will always vote for those who promise to take from the haves and give to the have-nots. We will build our world, just like there, we will build our new world. But that's just the prelude, and the real story is about taking away and dividing, and hit even harder the one who had it and from whom you took it, because that's exactly why you hate him. But let's get back to Somali. Their country is plagued by poverty, while those in power who receive money from the United States used to get insane amounts of cash, insane amounts, and live in unbelievable luxury. There are no jobs for Somalis, and it's almost impossible to get out. There's no hope. You're born, and that's it, so to speak. You're going nowhere. And here, ships pass by nearby, carrying loads of unimaginable wealth. You need strength to grab some cabbage soup. But what does strength mean? It means, well, things like motorboats, weapons, training, capturing ships. And most importantly, someone needs to tell you which ship is coming and what's on board. If they're just iron plates, who even needs them? You travel 500 miles each way, and it's just iron plates. I don't even know if iron plates are an actual cargo. And where exactly will it be located? The right vessel is needed in a day. Where could it come from? How could it get there? So this is the only option. Yes, I mean, there are two options. The first option is a supernatural force. Maybe. And the other is satellites. But Somalia doesn't have satellites. Who does? Strange, isn't it? And who is interested in destabilizing the capitalist world? The world? Akul Shakalov. Who else was there with capitalism? Well, Europe and especially the United States of America. Can you remind me? I forgot. Who is that? And here come the brave Somali pirates rushing in. Well, and of course, the bravest one. Example, visa to the United States of America. Ilkan Omar and her people will arrange a meeting over there. Fake marriages, documents, and the case. What case? Participating in United States riots, for payment and loyalty, of course. This is what's called the circulation of Somalis in nature. That's all.